back. Francis Ngannou
Woo!
has officially signed a contract with PFL.
Oh, yeah.
As it turns out, PFL has basically been the company for quite some time, despite all the rumors of Ngannou dropping the bag and all this other bullshit. PFL has been talking with Francis Ngannou from almost the very beginning of his free agency, and they offered him quite a bit of shit that is quite unprecedented in the MMA world. He has kind of put the MMA world on its head a little bit with this new development and kind of, I would imagine, to a certain extent, breaking the ceiling of what things are possible for active MMA fighters in PFL, in the MMA world in general. And PFL is setting a new standard for how they do business in the MMA world, apart from how the other companies are doing business as well. So very interesting stuff. I'm going to go through, hopefully pretty quickly, the kind of little highlights here and there. So Ngannou's contract in the PFL, it will probably be for about 2 or 3 fights, according to Ngannou. It does guarantee a high 7-figure purse for each bout and a split of the event profits as well. His opponents are also going to be getting a minimum of $2 million, apparently.
Wow.
Whoever fights him. So I think that that's kind of amazing.
Yeah.
On top of that, he is also not bound to the PFL the way that a lot of people are obviously bound to the UFC. So if Ngannou wants to go box, he has the ability to go box. A couple of the other additions that are also interesting is the freedom now to have a certain amount of sponsors. So PFL doesn't really allow the racetrack look, but they do allow 2 or 3 sponsors that are pre-approved by the PFL's execs for use. So Ngannou can come out with 2 or 3 things on his shorts and make a shit ton of money that is apart from the PFL, and make a living that way as well. Something that I think the UFC might want to take into consideration, but the way that the uniforms are made right now, especially with the sponsors that they have, I doubt we'll see that going forward, at least not for right now. But that was a big thing for Ngannou as well, and I think one of the considerations when it came to the UFC, it sounds like he kind of had half foot out the door by the time he was fighting towards the end of his contract in the UFC, and I think a lot of that had to do with their outlook on what Francis really wanted. Because the reality is I think he took a big pay cut, right? If we look at just cash, the UFC was talking about offering him $20 million, I think, or some crazy shit, and he's not making $20 million, I don't think, in the PFL. But he's got a lot of these other things on the table apart from just straight up cash money. One of the other things he ended up getting as well is a seat on the fighters advisory board on the PFL. The interesting thing to keep in mind is the PFL already had this advisory board in place. This isn't like a new thing that they did for Ngannou. But what makes this interesting is that this is the first active fighter on that board. Currently, they have Randy Couture on that board, so it's not like they haven't had a fighter before. But Ngannou is going to be an active fighter sitting on this board and being a part of a lot of the big decision-making going down in the PFL, one of which apparently he said had to do with how the $2 million for his opponents came to be. So it'll be interesting to see how much this impacts the MMA world going forward, the small and subtle changes it might bring to how people negotiate, what people look for, things that they might be able to get, things that maybe promoters going forward might be able to move in that direction as far as changes and things like that are concerned. So I think it's very, very interesting. And it sounds like Ngannou's very happy. I don't think he fumbled the bag at all. I think, in fact, he did something that was not only courageous, but did something that, again, is unprecedented and could change a lot going forward.
Yeah, he has a seat at the table. It
Yep.
seems like it's what he wanted.
And he's the first to have it. And for all of John Jones's... And John Jones had to have a chirp about it, of this or that about it. Talking about, how can you call yourself the baddest? Who calls themselves the baddest man to the planet across the street, right? And Ngannou's response, I thought, was pretty dope, though. He says, well, then cross the street. Which,
Yeah.
considering the circumstances, I thought was a beautiful response. But when you look at how Ngannou did his thing, and how Jones is now signed to an 8-fight deal that he's probably not going to fight out and is probably going to stay stuck to for the rest of his life, it's a weird flex to talk shit about a man who seemingly got everything he asked for and something that people didn't even know that they could ask for.
I mean, I don't think John thinks it's a weird flex because I think he is a guy who looks at it from the competition standpoint, and I don't think John Jones would ever fight in the PFL a day in his life because he would feel like he was in the minor leagues, especially in the heavyweight division. As good as PFL is and has become in many of the divisions, at heavyweight it is paling in comparison to the UFC roster.
Sure.
So I think John looks at it more that way personally. But I agree, Francis did get a lot of what he wanted. He got this ability to, I guess, help set up a PFL Africa, which was a big thing he had always wanted in the UFC that hadn't happened.
I did miss that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I heard a lot of what you said. I didn't think that was in there, so that's another key point as well. So, yeah, I mean, look, he did well. I hate all these people saying, oh, he was afraid to fight John Jones, blah, blah. It's so fucking stupid. If John Jones was back sooner, they would have fought in the UFC already. I promise you, Francis Ngannou was not afraid to fight John Jones. I promise you. It had
also
nothing to do with that.
This take that John Jones needed 3 years to quote unquote prepare. You can keep riding that fucking wave if you want. I'm not sold on that at all. I'm not saying he was afraid of Francis, but the idea that everybody is supposed to just stay there and make weird fucking decisions just so they can fight John Jones is odd to me. No one's waiting around for John Jones. No one should be holding their breath for John Jones. God knows the man has dropped that responsibility more than enough times in his career for anybody to do such a thing. Again, I think Francis Ngannou really comes out on top here. It seems to me like John Jones has a contract that doesn't allow him to properly live a combat life. Even, let's say, for example, John Jones right now isn't even thinking about anything else. And I don't doubt that for a minute. I think his focus is totally UFC, totally gold belt. Why else do I need to do anything else? Dude's not going to go box, right? I totally get that. But the idea that he wouldn't even give himself the opportunity to be open to something coming up, something that might be exciting, that he has to ask Dana for permission, that he has to be put in that position where Francis doesn't. Who has more freedom? Who has the better contract? Is John making, $10 million plus pay-per-view? Is he making more than Francis Ngannou cash money? Maybe.
Yeah.
But who really has the better contract? Because I would argue it's Ngannou.
Yeah, I mean it's the same thing. I don't know if we all made this point, but I know I certainly made it. That I said back when this news first broke of Ngannou leaving the UFC. It's that he has now made out great. He got a lot of the things that he wanted. He's going to be fine financially, all this, but he had to sacrifice what could have been a furthering of his legacy because he cannot do it now. Your legacy is not going anywhere further than it is right now by fighting Ante D'Elia or Bruno Capoloza or Dennis Goltsov. And yeah, there's this rumor of the PFL buying Bellator, but even if they do, all right, does it even happen soon enough that Ryan Bader's still fighting? Valentin Moldavsky, Linton Vassell, all right, it's names. It's not anyone who would have even made it to a level of fighting Francis Ngannou in the UFC. So he has absolutely had to sacrifice that. Now, granted, he might stand in a boxing ring across from Tyson Fury or Deontay Wilder. And he has alluded to the fact himself that he's actually been getting more traction lately with Deontay Wilder. So I don't know what happened on the Fury front because they both seemed like they were absolutely ready to make that happen. He kind of said it's now seeming like Wilder has moved to the forefront. And he did say that he would want to take a quote-unquote warm-up boxing fight before that, which I thought was going to mean a lesser guy. I mean, it's lesser, but then he was I think maybe Anthony Joshua. So not exactly the warm-upest warm-up you ever heard of. But what he is saying is Anthony Joshua in Africa as his first fight. And then if he was to win that, Deontay Wilder. So certainly a chance to stand across from some big names in the boxing ring. Granted, can he even beat Anthony Joshua to even get to the next fight? I mean, I want to say no, as much as Anthony Joshua has been a bit disappointing.
I was going to say, out of the three you named, Anthony Joshua would be the one I'd go with, too, at least to begin with.
Yeah, oh, yeah. So, his legacy, it'll be a weird one. It's what happens in boxing. If he can get a win, I guess it goes through the roof. But his MMA legacy is not getting added to anytime soon by knocking out some random guys.
Yeah.